We're gonna cut out the first few interviews. Yeah. We're in Corona, New York today with Apostolos Koumbitsis, who is currently the protopsoti of the Transfiguration of Christ Greek Orthodox Church in Corona, New York. He began his lifelong study of the patriarchal style of chanting initially with his father, and now holds a music teacher's degree from the Conservatory Musico Collegio in Thessaloniki, Greece. We thank you for having us today and for letting us conduct this interview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. The honor is mine.
This is our student of Byzantine music, Titus, who is a newly baptized Orthodox Christian. We thank you for being here today. And with that, we'll have you open us with the first question.
When did your interest in Byzantine music begin?
So I first became interested in Byzantine music at a very young age, which is kind of a cliche amongst some of us chanters that have been around for a while. My father was a priest in the Greek Orthodox Church here in America, and he was from Thessaloniki, and his teacher in Thessaloniki was the great Konstantinos Pringos, who used to be the Archon Protopsaltis of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So I first was taught by my dad, and he kind of instilled that love of Byzantine music, in me. At 4 years old, I chanted my first epistle. It was the Epistle of Christmas. It's the shortest one of the year. I couldn't read it 4 years, so I had to memorize it. So not only did I have to memorize the lyrics, the words of the epistle reading, but also the melody, how to chant it. My dad taught me that. By 7 years old, I was doing supplication services, paraklisi to the Panagia, and by 10 years old, I was doing full-blown liturgies. So I was fairly young when I got that, and to this day, that enthusiasm has only grown.
What was your motivation and inspiration to continue learning?
My motivation, I guess, was, and I know I repeat this to a lot of people that I have discussions with, and that is maintaining and keeping and preserving and subsequently teaching the tradition, the hymnological tradition of the Greek Orthodox Church. Byzantine music is the official musical system of the church. And there's a lot of, we have kind of strayed away from that, especially in this country. And that's a whole separate, discussion about that. But in other words, 4-part harmony with mixed men and women choirs with European music is not the music of the church. So in my endeavor, for what I had learned from my dad, I decided to just keep moving forward with it and said this has to be taught. This people need to know certain things, and sometimes you make friends, other times they don't want to hear what you have to say. But my motivation is to continue to preserve Byzantine music. Byzantine music is not just a nice thing to hear. It's part of prayer. So when you're in a church to pray, so that's kind of what kept me going about this.
What challenges have you faced as a chanter, and how were they overcome?
I would say several challenges. First and foremost, probably, if I'm going to go back to when I, started in my younger years, for example, not a lot of people knew how to chant. So, and those that did come up to the chanter stand, to the analogion, didn't know how to chant. Sometimes they were even tone deaf. And after a lifetime of hearing, tone deaf, colleagues and trying to work with them and so forth, that's a big challenge, is teaching the music and teaching the proper scales and so forth. Here in America, of course, probably as of the last maybe 20 years, there's this push for chanting in the English language. That's a challenge for me. Actually, it's probably not so much a challenge for me because I don't chant in English. So I don't really get involved with it. I don't agree with it, and I think there's a lot that's lost in translation. You know, another challenge is trying to teach what the Greek is saying, and then why the English translation may not be the most correct.
What
You know?
certain efforts do you think could be done in order to open the full meaning of the text to every listener?
I mean, every Greek Orthodox church practically in this country has a book in the pew. Greek on one side, English on the other. Some of the more sophisticated volumes have Greek phonetics, right? Greek phonetics, and then the English translation. We could provide, you know, now we have the iPhones, now we have the digital chant stand that's available to everybody with an iPhone that the Archdiocese has. I think that we could provide people with numerous tools. The problem is that you can't use those tools on the fly in church during service. You're never going to understand, even hearing it in English. And that's my challenge to someone to prove to me that you can understand. People don't seem to want to do homework. You know, you've got to read the liturgy, understand the word, read the Greek, and then read the English translation. There are some decent translations out there, but not ones that are matched to music, you know, that you can chant in English. There's a lot that's lost in that type of a translation, you know.
I must say from my own study in seminary that I always benefited from not only reading the English translation, but looking up the meaning of the original Greek text, which definitely expounded and gave greater depth to the text.
Right, exactly. Well, Greek was the original language. If you really want to know what something means, you have to go to the original language. I'm not really impressed with a lot of the English translations that are out there. Having said that, I believe they are a great help. I will not discount them for being a study aid, for lack of a better word. And whatever might be lacking, someone can easily ask their priest or ask a chanter, you know, what I came across this is the translation, is this correct? You know, we have this huge challenge in this country with certain, you know, congregants wanting to hear it in English, and others that, even converts, they want to hear it in the original Greek. I think there's more converts that want the original Greek rather than the English. At least that's what I've come across. Because I don't think there ever will be a perfect translation. I don't, unless the English language radically changes, I don't foresee that happening. Not in my lifetime, maybe not even in my grandkids' lifetime, you know. There has to be a huge language change in order for that to happen.
It only goes to show the great need for catechetical work.
Yes, absolutely. Bible studies, even okay, a lot of priests hold Bible studies, which is great. How about hymnology studies, where the chanter can lead such a group and say, here's what we're chanting this Sunday. Here's the hymn for the Sunday of the Prodigal Son, which happens to be today. What does this mean? What is the chanter chanting here? Why does the melody go up high in this phrase and then it goes down low in the other phrase? Colorizing of text has a tradition behind that as well. I'm in the process of writing an article, which it's been in the process for 5 years now, and I have not released it. I was originally going to put it on my blog, and I have a feeling it's going to turn into a small book, and that is the use of the English language in liturgical worship in the Orthodox Church. You know, it's no secret that I'm opposed to it. I'm not in favor of it, but I give my reasons why. And all of the arguments that I've heard, you know, all my lifetime about English, I basically address in this article. So some people, you know, are, wow, that's interesting. Other people are like, oh, I've been called an Anglophobe. I've been called. It's like, no, you don't understand. And there are times where I do agree with the use of English. The Lord's Prayer, the Creed, the Epistle, the Gospel, must be in English. The sermon absolutely has to be in English. You know, this whole thing about preaching in the language of the people, I'm not going to discount that. Absolutely, English should be used. When you get to hymnology and the chanting of these hymns, where since time immemorial there's been a marriage between the Byzantine music system and the Greek language, to try to divorce that and shove another and replace it with another language or even another musical system, you are diluting the whole experience of Byzantine chant, of hymnology within the framework of the services, whether it's the Divine Liturgy, whether it's a simple blessing of the waters, you know. So I try to be tactful, I try to, you know.
Are there, surely that any translation that's conducted is kind of trying to fit something that is like a square peg inside of a triangular hole.
Correct.
So it's not going to quite fit exactly.
Yeah.
However, are there any translations that you've seen and you actually looked at that translation and said, you know, that one actually works?
I have to admit, I haven't studied it enough to be able to answer your question with 100% certainty.
Sure.
I've seen a lot of translations. There's two schools of thoughts with translation.
Sure.
School of thought number one, keep the original melodies, the original notes, right from the classical music books of Byzantine chant. I'm talking about books from the 1800s that were first published on the printing press. The classical volumes, the Anastasimataria, the Irmologium, the Doxostarium, from Petros the Peloponnesios. Keep all the music intact and then rework the English in order to fit that music so that Ti per Majo sounds like Ti per Majo, except now there's just another language that fits into it. That school of thought was mostly done by Father Seraphim Dediz. He's the one that actually started the digital chant stand that the Archdiocese now has. With all due respect to Father Seraphim, who did a monumental work with this project, I think that the translations fell short. They were awkward in a lot of ways, and they didn't fit properly. Words were not translated properly. There were fill-in words that had to be used because of the different syllabic structure of Greek and English. Did it work? It worked. It did work, but not to perfection, you know. School of thought number two is to take a good translation, a grammatically correct translation that someone can understand, and then using the rules of Byzantine hymnology in terms of syllabic structure and cadences and musical phrases, adapt those to the new English translation. The danger to that is that in a lot of cases, although you'll have a nice sound translation, Ti per Majo will now no longer sound like Ti per Majo. It'll kind of sound like Ti per Majo, but it'll have some differences that had to be made in order to accommodate the English, you know, language. English and Greek are radically different, syllabically, structurally, grammatically, and to try to, you know, force that in the hymnology that's been passed down to us. If this were something brand new, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. But it's not brand new. We're trying to maintain a tradition of hymnology that's been passed down to, you know, from bishop to priest, from priest to chanter, from teacher chanter to student chanter. It's been, you know, it's something that's been around that I believe needs to be preserved.
Right. Yeah. I'm really inclined to agree with you. I've always thought that way. And I think the logic from the people that decided to do this is like, we want to make this accessible, but people don't have to learn Greek to understand the specific hymns and chants that they're hearing. They just have to learn and understand what those specific hymns are. So you don't need to know the entire language.
Correct.
My question to you is, what do you think is really, because, you know, talking about accessibility and the Orthodox Church in these modern times wants to Greek families that have traditionally, as well as new converts, they want to bring new people. So I think we want to make it accessible, but what do you think is lost in translation for both Greeks, but also maybe especially like new generations and new converts that are entering the church that they are missing out on to not have the experience of just the original Greek?
Right. Very good question, and I like the fact that you use the word experience, and I'll get to that in a second, because that's kind of one of the things in this article I've been writing for 5 years that I actually focus on, and which is a major difference. So, what's missing in translation? Number one, it's the mere structure of the language.
Yeah.
You're never going to get a perfect hit. Not every word in Greek can be translated into English. I can rattle off a few words right now. How do you translate the word Theotokos? Bearer of God, God bearer. How do you translate the word Pantokrator? He who holds all. He who holds all. Four syllables, but Pantokrator is also four syllables. But it doesn't mean anything. You know, he who holds all is a translation that you're like, well, what does that mean? What's he holding? You know. Which is why I always harp on some sort of Bible study, some sort of reading, some sort of, speak with a chanter, speak with your priest, have these discussions so that you understand outside of the liturgy, outside of the church, what something means.
The resources are surely there. People simply have to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of resources, even on the internet, free of charge, and you're correct, they're there. Coming then into church with this understanding, oh, now I know what that means. Now I know what this hymn is saying. Now you're in church and you hear the hymn, you focus on prayer. You focus on prayer. Bob Simon, from the television series 60 Minutes, a number of years ago, finally, after many years of pleading and asking, the community of Mount Athos was finally allowed entrance. And he brought a small film crew to record the life of Mount Athos, to record what was going on. Bob Simon is no longer with us, unfortunately, he passed away, but he left a very good documentary on Mount Athos. It's available on YouTube, free of charge. He talked a lot about what was going on. He interviewed a lot of monks. A lot of them were from here, educated with doctorate degrees.
I love that image.
Yeah. And it gives you a huge perspective on this monastic community, on what these people do all day long. My father used to say, this world is still in existence because of what those monks do on Mount Athos, okay? Because of the sacrifices that they make. That's why God hasn't just destroyed us all at this point. So there's one thing, though, that pertains to hymnology that Bob Simon said in his report. And I kind of already took this quote and I'm using it as the closing for this article I keep writing about that hasn't seen the light of day yet. Bob Simon talked about how they had to get up early in the morning, and they got up and there was a service in the morning, so we all went to the church and there was prayer. Everything was chanting. It was in the Byzantine chant. And Bob Simon said, we didn't understand one word. We didn't have to. To me, that's profound.
I remember that quote.
Yep. We didn't have to understand. Why? Because it's not about the understanding, it's about the experience. I wouldn't be surprised if Bob Simon himself, after this experience he had at Mount Athos, didn't inquire about possibly becoming an Orthodox Christian. I don't know that for a fact, but he was so in tune with this interview that he was doing. He was very interested in what he was doing, and he was very excited to bring it finally to air on television. And what he saw, I wouldn't be surprised if he may have gotten a thought in his head that way. I don't want to start any rumors here about poor Bob Simon, but the statements that he made in that interview and that whole documentary
It really speaks for all of us.
Absolutely. We didn't understand a word. We didn't have to. And if you really want to understand, then you go home, you pick up the book, you read the translation. Read even a bad translation, but read something. And then if you don't like what you're reading, then inquire. There's other resources, there's other references.
Seek and you shall find.
Seek and you shall find. And the most important thing is, one could say, I just don't have the time for that. And my response is, you mean to tell me that you don't have time for your own soul? Because that's what you're nurturing, is your soul. Byzantine music is not just some guy showing off his voice, or some guy showing you how he can do all kinds of intricate maneuvers with this hymn or that hymn, or having a whole bunch of people together as a choir, which does sound beautiful. It's about prayer.
I couldn't agree with you more.
If the chanter, or even the choir, I was the choir director in Philadelphia, at the Cathedral in Philadelphia, St. George, Center City, when I was hired there back in 2000. And I was up having rehearsal with them, one of my first rehearsals. And I said, can anyone tell me what is our role here? And they looked at me like I had three heads. And finally they started speaking up. Well, we're supposed to sing, these hymns of the liturgy. Yes, that's true. What else? What's our main role? Well, we're responding to the priest's petitions. Yes, but what's the main purpose that we're up here? All of that, yeah, that's what we are. We're a choir. We're going to be doing it. But what's the main purpose? And after the crickets died out, I said, I'm going to give you the answer. We only really have one role here. And that role is to help those people down there to pray. If we can't do that, let's just pack it up and call it a day, because we're wasting our time here. This is not about the sopranos showing off their range. This is not about all the syncopation we can do with some of these cool compositions that have been written over the years for the American audience. This is about prayer. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a good prayerful atmosphere when you have that kind of choir versus a good Byzantine choir or Byzantine chanter. That's what I try to get across to people that have these kinds of discussions with me. And that's the biggest challenge, is getting them to understand that. The Orthodox Church is not about understanding. That's a very pietistic thought about church. We are more of an experiential church. When those apostles in the upper room on the day of Pentecost, tongues of fire came upon their heads and they experienced those tongues of fire. Do you think they really understood anything? They had no clue what was going on. They just saw tongues of fire. And all of a sudden, they could speak in other tongues. And not tongues like you hear some of these evangelists on television speak, where you can't understand what they're saying. Indistinguishable. They spoke other languages. The word glossa means language in Greek. So these evangelists don't get it. And they try to do unintelligible mumbo-jumbo stuff to get people to, contribute to their cause or whatever. They spoke other languages. Why was that important? Because now they could go out to the entire world and spread the gospel. That was Christ's commandment. Spread the gospel throughout all the nations. Each nation had its own language. So we're more of an experiential church rather than understanding in real time, which is why Bob Simon's comment was just so profound and so in line with Orthodox teaching.
The illumination of the human heart.
Exactly.
You do plan to publish the article, right?
I do. I really do. Yeah. It was supposed to go on a blog, because I have a little blog that I would upload some articles. It was originally a blog that was meant for chanters, and then other people just started wanting to get more information, and I don't contribute to it as much as I'd like because of time. Now this article, I keep making notes to myself and in my phone or notes on my desk, and it's really turned out to be more than a blog article. And I have a feeling I may be looking at the possibility of publishing it as part of either some other work I'm going to do, or even just that alone. It's going to be, when I printed it out one time, single-spaced, not that big of a font. A couple of years ago, I printed it out, and it was 20 pages long.
Well,
20 pages long, and
I
can
speak for all of us when I say I think we look forward to its release.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
In your personal experience, especially as someone whose family is from Greece, you said your father was born and is from Thessaloniki.
Yeah.
What are the challenges, not just challenges, also, positive, like learning experiences, not just about difficulty, of being a chanter, doing this and helping and teaching people in the West, where not everyone is even necessarily from a Christian background that's coming to this, but even the majority of Christians in the United States are not in this tradition, obviously, not in Orthodoxy.
Right.
So the challenges of bringing this, we spoke about that a little because we talked about how the organized church is embracing, the English translations for the hymns, but I feel like that's just one part of it when it comes to the chanting and everything. So I'm just curious in your experience, just how you have maneuvered that and made sense of it for your role.
So, both of my parents were from Greece. I was born in the United States. My first language was actually Greek because that's what we spoke in the house, okay? To this day, I do not speak English to my mother, for example. Dad was fluent in both languages, and he preached in both languages as well. My mom never really learned the English language, and it's painful to try to speak to her in English, So I've always had the Greek. Back in the day, there was never a discussion about chanting in English, even with my dad. After I was a teenager, and even when I was into my teens, the subject was brought up somewhere, I don't remember. My dad wasn't really, having come from a Byzantine music background, he wasn't that keen on it. And what he would do, maybe it was in a mocking way, but not really. It was actually an exercise for me.
Sort of a novel idea.
He said he would get the newspaper, and he said, first he started with a Greek newspaper. Here's the Greek paper. Chant this article in tone so-and-so. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, you can read Greek, you know the syllables. I said, okay. And I went ahead and chanted an article about the prime minister in Greece who did this and whatever, did that, and it was, and I cadenced everywhere I was supposed to and on the periods and all that. And if I made a mistake, my dad would stop me and say, okay, why did you do this? It'd be better if it sounded this way, So it was a learning experience. And then he, after a number of years, he gave me the same exercise in English. And I did it just to play the game. And I said, it doesn't sound right. He goes, it's because the language is not conducive to chanting. The language itself, English is a Low Germanic language that sounds harsh to the ear. It's not like Arabic. There's a lot of wonderful Arabic chanters. Arabic is a different type of language. With regards to trying to promote this type of music, I think it's possible with the right presentation. You guys, I know, probably don't remember, but you might remember, a number of years ago, there was a CD that became a bestseller. I think the name of the CD was called Chant, if I recall. It had a light blue background, and it was made by the Benedictine monks. Do you remember this CD? Vaguely. It was huge. I mean, this was Gregorian chant is what it was. It was the Benedictine monks, and it was in Latin or whatever. There might have been a couple of English thrown in. It became such a bestseller. Young people were buying this CD to listen to this chanting, and I even heard comments that, oh, I put this on when I want to pray. I'm like, that's what we gotta do, And I think our music is more superior than Gregorian chant. Gregorian chant to me is very monotonous. It's very dull. Okay. Whereas melodically, the chants in our church, in the Greek church, in the Orthodox church, if they're chanted properly, they're much more melodic and they're much more engaging. Musical phrases go high to accent heaven or to accent glory or to accent something positive. They go down, and even in chromatic scales, when we talk about the devil, when we talk about Hades, when we talk about sin, the words of the hymn are painted by color, which is basically the musical color, depending on what the context is. So I think if we can get that across to a brand new convert who has no clue what Orthodoxy is, what Eastern Orthodoxy is, came from even an evangelical background or a Baptist, even a Roman Catholic background, if we can get them to understand what this is and why we do it, I think we got a shot at it, especially if the Benedictine monks had a best-selling album, They had a good PR team, I'm sure, and they got it done and they sold a lot.
I must say that I'm not quite sure, but for sure the Psaltic art of the Orthodox Church is meant to contain the theology of the Church.
Absolutely.
And engage the intellect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's 1,000% correct. And the reason that is so is also because Byzantine chant, along with iconography, Byzantine iconography, those were used as teaching tools. A lot of people back in the day were uneducated. They didn't all have degrees or were not learned men from institutes of higher learning. I'm going back in the day, I'm going into the 100s, 200s, 300s. So the church used iconography and used chant to teach a lot of these concepts. And when you hear it melodically, somehow it gets ingrained in your head. I had a discussion once with the former, he's still living, but he's in a nursing home, unfortunately, in Turkey, Leonidas Asteris, who was the Archon first chanter of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Yeah. And Asteris has a huge musical background. The man was a lyric tenor in the Turkish opera, but he didn't sing like a Turkish opera star when he was in the Patriarchal Church. He chanted like a Byzantine chanter. He learned very well. And he came to New York a number of years ago before he got sick. He actually came here to seek some sort of medical, he was here for medical reasons. And I was fortunate enough to meet him at the Archdiocese in New York. And I sat with him for about an hour and a half. And he told me a few things about, what books should be used, what should you use to learn from. He told me about be very careful of the trisimos rhythmos, the three beat, and then he even said, because it starts to sound like a waltz, da 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 da. He said, we're not waltzing in church. I said, no, we're not. So, but there is a trisimos rhythmos. When you chant it properly, it's not a waltz. There's a different term for it, and it is 3 beats, to the measure.
There's a doxology in Trissimo.
Yes, there's a doxology in Trissimo. I think even Mount Athos had done one or something. That was made popular by them. We're very careful with Trissimos. And ironically, the Theotokie Parthene of Bereketis in all 8 tones, the terirems, are all in Trissimos, but they're not written in Trissimos in the Musikisilogi book. So one school of thought is to chant it the way it's written in straight time. The other one is to chant it according to Trissimos, and that's what the Constantinopolitans typically did, and that kind of prevailed. I was getting somewhere with what Leonidas Asteris said, based on your question.
Chanting in the West versus the original Orthodox countries.
Oh, right, exactly. He meant, he did say that priority has to be placed on the logos, The text is primary, and he would, with his accent, is the dominant, The text is the dominant aspect of the hymnology. The hymnology, the music, is what we call is an appendice of the logos. The word appendice is a vestiture, is a dressing. It dresses the text, That's what the purpose. You cannot prioritize melody over the logos, over the word, because then you're going to start getting into even bad executions of hymns, bad translations at times. The Western mind has to really focus to understand some of these concepts on this side, on our side. It's not impossible. I know people that have done it. I know people that have taken it upon themselves to learn Greek, and they speak very good Greek, and they came from a totally different background, but they immerse themselves. It's all about immersing you, and that's why I say a lot of times, even sometimes I say it as a joke, but I think it's true. The converts are going to say Orthodoxy in this country, not even the cradle Greek Orthodox. A lot of times, the converts are more astute to what's going on. They're more interested in learning. They're more interested in becoming a part of this new faith that their eyes have been opened to suddenly, and they want to understand it, but experience it the right way.
As a convert, I can say those are very humbling, touching words.
Yeah. And that's why any convert that comes to me, and if they even have a sliver of interest, I'll sit just like this and I'll talk for hours, and I'll say, look, I'm not trying to convert you. You came to me and you had a question, but I'm going to answer your question, and I want to answer it right so that you understand. Because if there is a possibility that you're seeking for something, I think if you really you're going to find it here in the Orthodox Church. If you can get past all the cliques and all the political stuff that happens, which happens in every church, the Orthodox Church is. Yeah, right. Exactly. The Orthodox, you will not find a better moral compass for your life than the Orthodox Church.
I think people get out of it what they put into it.
Correct.
I think it's vast and just like a bottomless with depth and richness, but people, you get out of what you put into, you have to put in that time and effort and stuff.
Right, yes.
So I can tell that your father was like a fascinating person.
Yeah.
He was like very interesting and had I think even like unique approaches to this tradition in a lot of ways. So we're definitely gonna get a chance to ask a question about him that I have in mind before the end.
Sure.
But for now, I'm gonna say besides your father, because we're gonna get to that.
Right.
Who else have been great teachers, influences? Can you tell a little about how they affected you?
So here in the United States, as most of us know, there are no great chanters. Okay, there, aside from the occasional immigrant that might have come from Greece or even Constantinople that knew a thing or two, they're probably very isolated in some church somewhere. It'd be lucky if it was in New York. I know that there's a teacher here in New York who has been here for many years and actually taught Byzantine music to students. And a lot of those students became chanters and are still in the area chanting. But for the most part, in a broad general sense, I wasn't near New York, for example, me personally. I didn't have that luxury. I had my father. That was my blessing. Now, my father, because he became a priest, didn't... There came a point where he couldn't take me beyond the theory because he had forgotten a lot of it. As a priest, you kind of don't use it that much, and he didn't study it completely, so he couldn't teach me some of the nuances of the notation or even of the scales. He could chant it for me, but he couldn't really teach it and tell me why this or that. So I had to kind of rely on other people. My godfather was also a priest. Who was in Ohio. And when we would go visit my godfather in Ohio, at least once a year, 3 or 4 hours were spent at his chanter's house at Kyriou Dionisi, because he was from Greece and he knew how to teach. So he's the one that I got the first real theory lessons from, because he's the one that wrote the exercises down for me, that wrote down the chart of the symbols and what they mean. Okay, it got to the point then where he would even mail me lessons. He says,
"Oh, wow."
Yeah, he says, look, you've got a grasp of this, which is good. I can mail you the next lesson. I said, good. If I needed anything, it was on the phone. My biggest influence came at 13 years old when my father played for me a reel-to-reel recording of the great Archon Protopsantis of the Patriarch, Mr. Thrasivoulos Stanitsas. And I asked my dad, I said, who's that? And his eyes widened up and he says, "Oh, that's the best chanter that there is." And Stanitsas was still living at the time, but he was not. He had already left Constantinople because of the what do they do when they kick him out? Yeah, exactly. So he was now in Greece, but he's the Archon Protopsaltis of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. He left since 1964, and I said, "Really? What's his name?" And he says, "His name is Thrasivoulos Stanitsas." I'd never heard the word Thrasivoulos in my life. Thrasivoulos, what kind of a name is that? I said. He goes, "No, it's a yeah." So I listened to one. He was at that point. He was chanting, I think, hymns from today, from the Prodigal Son Sunday, and the Doxastiko mesmerized me. The doxology afterwards memorized, and then he had to put on another recording where, for the first time, I heard the doxology in Varis of Hormuzios. My dad says, "Oh, we don't chant that doxology except for 2 special occasions during the year." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, you're never going to be able to chant this until you're 30 years old." I said, "I'm going to prove you wrong," I told him. But ever since that exposure to Stanitsas, I started listening to only Stanitsas. It was as if he was my teacher. I never met him in person.
Wow.
Never met him in person. I spoke to him on the phone many times.
You did?
Yeah. I spoke at one time. He even gave me a little bit of a lesson over the phone because I said, "Please just chant this. I want to hear it." Well, okay, and reluctantly, but he did it for me. It was something that had to do with one of the neumes that changed the tetrachord. And when he did it, I immediately knew what was going on, So despite the fact that I never met him, I never really spent time with him, I humbly dare to call him my teacher.
Definitely a blessing to even been able to speak with him on the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
He taught you.
Exactly.
I think he definitely did teach you.
Yeah, I commemorate his name along with my family's name, for the repose of his soul, because it's because of him. I mean, my father first, but Stanitsas really ignited this fire to maintain the patriarchal tradition. I said, I want to chant just like him, or at least try to, because every other chanter at that point that I had heard, I couldn't unsee. It was like night and day. And Stanitsas didn't do it this way. Well, there's more chanters besides Stanitsas. Yes, but this is the right way. That's the mentality I had. And now after he's gone, unfortunately, now everybody's like, "Oh, Stanitsas this, Stanitsas that." Whereas when he first came to Greece, they would call him a Turk up and down. They were afraid that he was going to take their spot after he left Turkey. And he never went to take anybody's spot. He went to a church that just simply happened to have an opening, and he stayed there for the rest of his career until he retired. So, and he had a very good choir. He taught a lot of people while he was in Greece, and those that really understood flocked to him,
I think some of the recordings that I've heard have him chanting with other people from the congregation.
Yeah, you could hear people in the congregation trying to chant with him, I mean, they just got to know him where he was at St.
Right.
Demetrius at that church. And he tried to do things a little differently every time, because when you're at the Patriarchate, you have to chant the same thing every time. The same Doxastiko, the same, there's a tradition there that you stick to and you don't deviate. When he went to Athens, he finally had an opportunity now to kind of express himself, still staying in line with patriarchal tradition. But now he made a couple of changes. He would change this melody a little bit. He would add this little inflection or intonation, or what they call a figura, which is a little dressing of the music of the word of the.
Sounds like a figure.
Yeah, exactly. A figura is an embellishment, a little embellishment. You would hear him, do some things in there. Again, always in line with his roots, and never sounding like song, or let's break out the bouzoukia. This is a nightclub. Never made the church a nightclub. So after that, while I was in college, I met with he used to chant at the cathedral in Philadelphia, St. George. He was another Constantinopolitan, came from Constantinople, and he was a very good chanter. When I first met him, I would tell people, this man is the best chanter in the United States of America. And I tell him to his face. He goes, "No, stop." I said, "That's how I viewed you." and I tried to learn things from him, and I did. And whenever I would get together with him, I chanted one Holy Thursday with him, which I have a recording of somewhere at St. George, and he taught me a lot of things. And then because I had such a, I was so, I had such a sense about the whole hymnology thing. A lot of things I was able to study on my own. I was able to pick up a theory book or pick up a book written by someone else that gave their perspective on Byzantine hymnology. And if I had questions, I would ask the appropriate people.
Incredible.
I got my diploma in Byzantine music thanks to the former Archon First Domesticos of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, a gentleman by the name of Miltiadis Papas. And Miltiadis helped me achieve that, and get that degree, that diploma in Byzantine music. And I got that in Greece at the conservatory.
Have you also been to Constantinople, Istanbul?
I have not. Of all I mean, as a maniac as I am about Constantinople, I have not gone yet. I have not gone, but I will. At some point, I will. Yeah.
So Jordan, the other day, actually told me for the first time that for centuries, the original tradition of the Byzantine chanting was they weren't writing stuff down, they would practice. And he was also saying, they had time, so they would be like an everyday thing often, where they would just every day they would practice.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could say a word for people who are learning and practicing now about, despite the fact that, praise God, we have the internet, we have paper, we have, these are useful tools,
Yes.
but do you think that there's a way kind of to maintain that essence of just really soaking it in until it's second nature and not letting the other methods of learning, as useful as they can be, necessarily detract from us having that experience that those, long time ago chanters had?
Right. So I'm gonna start the answer to your question, which is a very good question, with a conversation that I had with Mr. Miltiadis Papas, the former Archon First. The first Domesticos is the immediate first helper to the Protopsaltis. The second Domesticos is the immediate helper of the Lambadarios, the leader of the left choir, okay? So Miltiadis went to the Patriarchate and was there for 10 years and achieved that rank of first Domesticos. I asked him a question one time because this was another blog article I was thinking of doing. And I said, what books of Byzantine chant should a serious student or lover of Byzantine music have on his bookshelf? I was shocked at the answer, but then I understood why when he explained it. His answer was, none of them. I said, wait a minute. He says, I'm not waiting any minute. None of them. You don't need books. And I said, why not? How are you going to learn? You're going to hear it from your teacher. That's how you learn. After that, books become useless. I said, even the long, the cherubic hymns, and even those. The tradition of the patriarchal chanters is to chant extithus, which means by heart. Now, they might learn from a book, okay, but even that book, the teacher has it up here and is teaching the student. As long as you're at the chanter stand with the teacher, with the protopsalti, and you go through 1, 2, 3, 4 liturgical cycles, you're going to start picking up what's going on. And a lot of this will be you'll know everything by heart. Holy Week, the only reason I put a book in front of me is for the guys around me to see what I'm doing. That's the only reason. Otherwise, I don't need a book, music book. So he said, no music books. I said, but we don't have teachers here in America. He didn't want to hear it. Well, go find a teacher. Easier said than done. But now to get to your answer, having said that, which is probably the most correct answer, what books do I need? Well, none of them. You have to hear everything from your teacher. So now we have a challenge. We have a problem here in this country, in America, where we don't have enough. I'm not going to discount everybody because there are some good chanters here of old time that have passed through, but there's not enough of them. They can't cover all the ground. So how do you do it? Thank God for YouTube. Thank God for the internet. I have an email that I actually set up as a template because I get asked a lot of the questions. I want to start hearing, I want to start learning. The only way you're going to start learning is by listening, and you have to listen to the proper stuff. If you don't listen to the proper stuff, you're going to get straight. You can't listen to a pop singer who pretends to know Byzantine chant and starts chanting hymnology and expect that you're going to do it the right way. This is a pop singer that's doing this for money, to sell CDs, and to, you know, to stand on stage in a semi-messianic pose and, you know, try to convince the people that this is correct. So, like I said, I have this email template that I send out to people, and it says, here's who you should be listening to. This name, that name, that name, that name. Here's some links. Here's where you can hear them. Modern day people that are still alive, this one, that one, that one. These are all sons or grandchildren of the great patriarchal chanters. Choirs only listen to this choir, that choir, or that. I think the list is only 3 choirs long for Byzantine choirs. All the rest, they take a lot of liberties. Capella Romana, for example, they do some good work. I'm not sure where they get their interpretations from a lot of times. I don't believe that is a typical example of true Byzantine chant, the way that it's chanted at the Patriarchate or now, for example. And I include even links, okay? Go listen here, go listen there, and then just do a Google search or do a YouTube search.
Yeah.
As long as you're listening to the proper people, you can hear this stuff, you can even start chanting along with it. And that's probably the next best thing to having a live teacher at your beck and call whenever you want.
For sure.
You know, I've tried finding solutions for people because they're out in the Midwest, or even they're in New York and I'm in New Jersey. You know, I can't meet with them every single day. Come to my church. I can't. I have to be at this church with my parents or whatever. So I try to find solutions and maybe use some technology and stuff that's available out there. Just be careful is what I basically tell them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think the internet's just an invaluable resource, and nothing beats learning from a real person.
Yes.
But like any time on command, we can just listen to not just like one chanter, but just like we can access just so many things that we never would be able to otherwise. So
The live recordings are probably preferable than studio recordings.
yeah.
Because studio recordings, sometimes they slow the tempo down a little bit. Or in reality, if you were in a church in actual practice, it would be like, you know, you don't chant a canon. Play go first. That's not how the canon is chanted. In actual practice, it would be there's a tempo, there's a certain tempo to it. It's great for the CD and the recording and the presentation when they're at a concert, but not in actual practice. So the live recordings, I usually tell people, seek the live recordings of these chanters if you can.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, you'll just, again, it's the next best thing. You'll learn a lot. There's plenty of stuff available. And I just tell people, if you can't find something, let me know. I'll record it for you, whatever.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you for being here today and
We have time
for
for
letting
other
us. You have one more question?
The questions are, we can cut this, moments of personal or spiritual significance, favorite hymns or feast days, and what advice for people just starting to study. And I also want to ask a question about his father, but I know I want to be respectful of time too.
Okay. The question right before the last one.
What are some of your favorite hymns or feast
Okay.
days?
Favorite hymns and feast days and experiences. Holy Week, hands down.
Yeah.
Holy Week to me, my father used to say as a priest, I live my life for Holy Week. I couldn't kind of really understand because what he meant by that exactly growing up, because I barely saw my father during Holy Week. You know, he was in church. If I wanted to see my dad during Holy Week, I had to go to church. And I was in church. But once I started understanding what these hymns mean, there's some hymns I can't even chant anymore because they're very emotional to me. There's certain readings I can't even read without breaking down into tears. Isaiah 53, I think it is, where he talks about like a lamb that was led to slaughter, and I start reading that, and I'm trying to swallow my tears, you know. So hands down, the hymns of Holy Week are extremely personal to me. which is why the Holy Week concert that I would direct is probably my favorite thing to do. And then, of course, the hymns of the Panagia, because of her role in our salvation, are important. The last question.
What advice to people just starting out?
Listen, and then listen some more, and then when you're done listening, go back and start listening again. Listen and listen and listen. That's the only, and I'm talking about someone now that wants to get involved chanting, okay? You have to listen, to these chanters and how they execute the hymnology. For the average Orthodox Christian that's coming into Orthodoxy, read a lot, read the proper books, read Timothy Ware's book on the Orthodox Church, read in advanced readings, even read the Philokalia, There's a lot of resources. There's nothing that's been left to question in Orthodoxy. Everything has been answered. Even the Bible, even the standard Old and New Testament. When people got married in church, my father, as the priest, would give 2 gifts to the newly married couple. He would turn to the bride and say, "This is an icon of our Panagia. Pray to her; she will give you anything you desire." And to the husband, he would say, "This is the Word of God," and he would hand him a Bible. Any problem you have in this life, the solution is in here. Read it, study it, and search for whatever you want in here. Now, beyond the Bible, of course, we have the writings of the Holy Fathers and so forth, but that's what I would tell people, and to ask questions, and to seek someone. If they have a good godfather or a good godmother, they should be their guide for that.
One more question. Your father, he just seems like such a fascinating character, and there's obviously not enough time to just say all of the things you learned from him and how that informed your experience. But beyond the fact that he helped you to learn, to the extent, of course, you had to do a lot of work on your own for that, but he was just a great influence when it came to that.
Sure.
But I was just interested, his life story and personality, how both that imparted something on you for your life path when it comes to Orthodox Christianity, the hymns and the chanting, but also, I think everyone experiences this on their personal journey, where you had to be like, I can't just mimic him and walk the same path as him. What can I learn from him? But what do I also just kind of realize I have to do my own way in a way that might be different from him, or even different than the way that he's telling me to do it? If you have anything to say about that.
Right. I tried not to deviate so much. I didn't want to, because I knew what his background was and who he learned from. So I didn't want to just be a renegade and say, okay, you taught me up to here, but now I'm going to take it further because I don't think you can do this. I'm going to go this path. Because now that opens up dangers in modifying and doing stuff that's really that you're not supposed to be doing in hymnology. So hymnology was what I was into. And I wanted to make sure that I was chanting properly. In the beginning, I did chant some stuff that was a little more expressive than what it should have been. And once I started learning about the history and what the patriarchals did and so forth, I did tone things down a little bit, and I chanted more properly. My dad's influence is because his teacher was a protopsaltis of the Patriarchate. So, and he tried to use that even in his ministry as a priest, to incorporate some of that style of chanting in what he did. And that encouraged me as well. So whatever I sought beyond the capabilities of my dad, I always made sure that where I was going was somebody that was in line with what I had already been taught. Yeah.
And you were fortunate because you grew up with it, so those formative years when you were a
Yes.
child, our brain is still developing.
Exactly.
It became like second nature to you.
Exactly.
People learning for the first time as adults.
As adults, it's tough, right? And that's a huge challenge. And I try to, and I don't try to downplay it, to say, oh, you'll learn it. Okay, yes, you'll learn it, but you do have to immerse yourself in it. But let me give you a guide. Here's where you need to go. Here's what you need to listen to. Here's why certain things are done the way that they're done. Kind of like a crash course in discussing this stuff with people that have not grown up with it. I can at least try to get them to understand what's going on, and why certain things are done the way they're done, But yeah, he influenced me a lot, and again, because of his background, and there was a time where I wanted to be a priest just like him. Yeah, when I was a kid, yeah, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a priest. I want to be a priest. And then after I started realizing that there was a lot of politics involved, that I probably didn't want to get to it. And then of course, by that time, I had already learned a lot in terms of chanting, and I loved it so much, I just made a decision like, look, I think my calling is more at this lecture, than at that one over there, So that's kind of what.
It's definitely a beautiful path you're taking.
Yeah.
We want to thank you for allowing us to conduct this interview, and we want to encourage all of our watchers to like and subscribe, and we thank you for staying for this interview, and until next time, we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Good luck.
Thank you.
That was great. Yeah, that was. I'm really happy that we had time.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be like Jordan told me.
You're gonna have to shut this off.
Jordan told me that.